All right, let's check in with chapter 8 of Stnr, where um, Edith is a terrible person. Um, um, yeah, I guess we're gonna have to see, because at the moment, I mean, at least at this moment, for this chapter, Edith is most definitely the antagonist to our protagonist, Stnr. Um, she has gone away. She went away for her father's funeral. They have this kind of odd thing of like her not being fairly expressionless, unmoved at her father's funeral. Uh, and when he is buried, she just puts her hand in her face and it leaves it there until someone touches her shoulder and she moves away. She goes into her room. She takes out all her belongings and divides them up into things that she bought herself and then things that her father um, had some hand in or gave her. And those things she destroys. She rips the stuffing out of any toys and and burns them. Any porcelain heads or stuff like that, she smashes to a powder until she's only got her own stuff left. Which that is been the main male figure in her life, and she has to talk to her mother, talk with her mother, strangely intimate talk with her mother, it says, where she talks about her childhood and her marriage. And you get the sense that these are the two things, being a daughter and now being a wife, and how she wants that change. And this is when she enacts that change, getting the modern haircut, the modern styles, learning to use makeup and stuff like that, as a part of her change. She definitely is like, this is the midlife crisis. She needs that change in her life. Uh, it is presented in kind of strangely methodical, strangely menacing sort of way, because you all know it's going to be pointing towards Stnr. But I'm trying to kind of also look at it as, this is Edith who has gone through her father, and then um, for all of his kind of passivity, maybe quietness, her marriage with Stnr, and she's decided to come back. She comes back and throws herself into kind of a new thing of she gets involved in the theater, even takes a couple of small parts, raises money for them, has all the theater friends over, and gets a player piano and starts teaching herself how to play the piano and stuff like that. Stnr and his daughter kind of retreating to the study, and kind of being separate from them, and him kind of going like, kind of regretting that he wasn't able to provide the meaning in her life that she wanted. But it's good that she's found her own path. And within that, he is, he's become more and more of a teacher. He's got students coming over, more and more students coming over, and he's working on his next book. And there's a passage in here which actually kind of reminds me of Brian at Bookish, which this is not me talking about Brian having an Edith for a wife or anything, but the idea of him working on his book. And he saw, with his daughter in the room with him, at her desk, and he saw the evening before him, and several evening mores in which he would be free to work on his book. What he wanted to do in this new book was not yet precisely clear to him. In general, he wished to extend himself beyond his first study in both time and scope. He wanted to work in the period of the English Renaissance, and to extend his study of classical and medieval Latin influences into that area. He was in the stage of planning his study, and it was that stage which gave him the most pleasure. The selection among alternative approaches, the rejection of certain strategies, the mysteries and uncertainties that lay in unexplored possibilities, the consequences of choice, the possibilities he could see, so exhilarated him that he could not keep still. He got up from his desk, paced a little, and in a kind of frustrated joy spoke to his daughter, who looked up her book and answered him. She caught his mood, and something he said caused her to laugh. Then the two of them were laughing together, senselessly, as if they were both children. Suddenly, the door to the her, suddenly, suddenly the door to the study came open, and the hard light from the living room streamed into the shadowed recesses of the study. Edith stood outlined in that light. "Grace," she said distinctly and slowly, "your father is trying to work. You mustn't disturb him." For several moments William and his daughter were so stunned by this sudden intrusion that neither of them moved or spoke. Then William managed to say, "It's all right, Edith. She doesn't bother me." As if he had not spoken, Edith said, "Grace, did you hear me? Come out of there this instant." And this is the opening of kind of the heartbreaking part of this novel for me so far, the most heartbreaking part of this novel of me so far, and the one that's really cast not Grace, as Edith as the major villain, because she removes Grace from Stoner's life. She pulls that desk out of his office. She takes her and dresses her up in frilly outfits. Takes that desk out, paints it pink. Make installs her back in her own room, and basically remorselessly grinds Grace into sort of her own image. It's like she has to play with children her own age. She shouldn't be so withdrawn, and forces her into all this stuff. And Grace becomes, it's like becomes kind of sullen and mute, and he asks her to leave her alone, to basically, like, you're hurting her, and she does not see it. And he overhears her saying to the mothers that she now has over to play with Grace. "Poor Grace, she's so fond of her father, but he has so little time to devote to her. His work, he has started a new book." Curiously, almost detachedly, he watched his hands, which had been holding a book, begin to shake. They shook for several moments before he brought them under control by jamming them deep in his pockets, clenching them, and holding them there. And it's like, he does confront her, and it's like, "Edith, I don't like what's happening to Grace." This is page 125. Instantly, she picked up as if on cue. "What do you mean?" He let himself down on the end of the sofa, away from Edith. A feeling of helplessness coming over him. "You know what I mean," he said wearily. "Let up on her. Don't drive her so hard." And and she's like, "No, Grace has never been happier. She has friends now, things to occupy her. I know you're too busy to notice these things, but surely you must realize that how much more outgoing she's been recently." And she laughs. She never used to laugh. Almost never. William looked at them, which is kind of ironic, because this all starts off with them laughing together and her yanking her out of the study. William looked at her in a quiet amazement. "You believe that, don't you?" "Of course I do. I'm her mother." And she did believe it, Stoner realized. He shook his head. "I've never wanted to admit it to myself," he said with something like tranquility, "but you really do hate me, don't you, Edith?" And what? The amazement in her voice was genuine. "Oh, Willie," she laughed, clearly, unrestrainedly. "Don't be so foolish. Of course not. You're my husband." "Don't use the child." He could not keep his voice from trembling. "You don't have to any longer. You know that. Anything else. But if you keep on using Grace, I'll—" He did not finish. After a moment, Edith said, "You'll what?" She spoke quietly and without challenge. "All you could do is leave me, and you'll never do that. We both know it." Which is, it's this really, really scary relationship that they're in. And the next attack in here, I talked about an earlier chapter of the study that he's made for himself. and that, it's like it's himself. And he comes home one day, and she is, with the help of a local handyman, has moved all his belongings out of the study and moved him into the sunroom, which can't be heated in wintertime. And you know, basically, she starts dumping other stuff in there. She lets Grace and her friends play in there, which destroys like the first page of his manuscript of his new book. He'd been torn and mutilated, and he gave up. He gives up, and he moves his books into the books at the university, where unfortunately he's got a keener young colleague who likes to have his student conferences in the evening, so he gets distracted by that, and he loses the book. He loses the book. He lost interest in his book. His work slowed and came to a halt. Finally, he realized that it had become a refuge, a haven, an excuse to come to the office at night. He read and studied, and at last came to find some comfort, some pleasure, and even a ghost of the old joy in that which he did, a learning towards no particular end. And Edith had relaxed her pursuit and obsessive concern for Grace, so that the child was beginning occasionally to smile, and even to speak to him with some ease. Thus he found it possible to live, and even to be happy, now and then. And that ends that chapter. So his relationship with Grace is damaged, his work is ruined, and he is able to find a little bit of happiness now and then. And that is the center of Stnr by John Williams. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a matter of, is this book being misogynistic in its portrayal of Edith? I mean, in some ways I can see that, Edith is very much a product of this, of her parents, and of sort of the expectations of marriage, and that her aggressions, her vindictiveness kind of comes out of this, and it becomes her for a while there, her meaning is to do it and to use, and unfortunately, parents using their children to wage war on each other is all too familiar and believable of a thing. There is sort of a thing of like, it's such the cliche of the absent father, and to tell a story where the father is absent because the mother has yanked the child away and put a barrier between them. Is that a complication of that kind of story of the absent father? Of like, maybe there's reasons why the father is absent, why things are set up so, or is that the fantasy of somebody who was absent and is now is kind of coming up with a self-justifying reason for it. Yeah. So interesting chapter. You're just aghast at Edith, but there's a part of me that's always like, I'm going to resist that, of like, okay, is Edith the villain? I mean, Edith, the book says Edith truly does believe that she loves Grace, but she is also definitely depicting her as like, and yes, I know I'm hurting you, and you can't leave me. We're locked together. Ha 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 ha. Which is, well, I mean, that is another very basic fear of a relationship, being locked together and not being able to escape, especially in a time when that was probably a lot less likely to happen. It's like, why can't Stnr leave Edith? But people didn't. You just didn't leave. That was it was not allowed. So yeah, really enjoying Stnr. More videos later.